Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are just about ready to get started here today. Today we have our Indigo Studio product manager, George Abraham. He is joining us today to talk about comparing code-free prototyping tools. And it's going to be a really cool interactive session. We got a lot of different things that we want to show you today. So while we're presenting, please feel free to use that questions panel in your GoToWebinar panel on the sidebar there to ask whatever questions you'd like as we go throughout the presentation. George will be addressing them as needed and then at the end of the presentation as well. So I will not take up any more of your time. I'm going to hand it over to George and enjoy the presentation.
Morning. So in the interest of full disclosure, as Jessica just said, that I am the product manager for Indigo Studio. And we kind of came up with this webinar topic because we also get these questions all the time as how does Indigo Studio compare to some of the other tools out there? And it's a very valid question because there are a lot of tools out there. It's a great time to be prototyping, to be designing, and every second day, I think a new tool comes up. So rather than comparing exclusively to one tool or another, my approach would be more in terms of trying to create a bucket for each kind of tool. And as my part of my research for Indigo Studio, I do try a lot of tools out there, way more than you might. And I'm trying to compartmentalize them as quickly as possible, rather as how similar is this tool to something else and how different is this tool from something else. And that's pretty much how I'm trying to approach this session. So during the session, I'll show you the way I'm categorizing these tools and maybe highlight what makes each of these categories different and unique. So naturally, it's not going to be an exhaustive list because we have a very short amount of time. Either this session is going to be very interesting and very dynamic, or it's going to be you watching me moving some pixels and my mouse cursor moving like crazy. So with that, let me just launch up my slide. And these are not extensive slides. It's just to give you some context. And I would like to start our conversation at the same place. So as I said, comparing code-free prototyping tools. And I always use this slide. So if you have attended any of my previous sessions, I always talk about prototype as being that tangible artifact which we can present in front of users. It's not something which, yes, people do use it as a thinking tool, but at the end of the day, we want users in the design process. And one way of getting users in the design process is by exposing what you are thinking about designs and your design intentions in a manner that users can actually react to it, take action on it. And I'm not really talking about feedback because the feedback is a very loose word. We are actually looking for reactions. We are asking them to do something because that's what interaction design or is trying to do for UI prototypes is allowing people to get a taste of how the application would be by actually doing things they care about. What my focus is not on is creating annotated wireframes or detailed design specifications, because this is excellent again as a thinking tool. It's a way of, I mean, I find the word wireframe synonymous with UI sketches, and just the fact that you're sketching digitally, I think we have come up with this new fancy term called wireframe. But at the end of the day, it really helps a designer not use just words to talk about what this design is going to be like. They're actually able to present some visuals, which kind of represents the information hierarchy, the kind of content blocks which would be necessary. And this is very useful because once I see it, I can understand it better than and just reading about it. So as I was saying earlier, our main goal is to try to think of our designs as something the users can use in the context of use, and less about trying to present to a wide audience and explain how cool the design is and how much thought process went into it. Because at the end of the day, the users actually never know about the amount of whether you took 2 hours to come up with this design or you took 20 hours to come up with this design. It really doesn't matter to them as long as it works the way they expect it to work. I always talk about reducing complexity during prototyping. And one way to achieve that is you only need to prototype the experience of using that particular application. And one of the examples I'm going to show you very shortly is a simple usability task which we wanted to conduct. And the purpose of the task was to evaluate a new iPad based dashboarding application. And the idea was users would be able to do self service BI, as in pull data from a data store and, apply filters, do pivoting, and all that stuff. In my mind, it's a reasonably complex um, prototype. But at the same time, the complexity is mitigated by the fact that I have only worried about prototyping the pieces that I needed for the usability test. You can think of the experience of using it as stories of use or a user flow and not just the page design. And we just need to figure out what are the high priority user flows and just pick those for prototyping. And ideally, you should be spending a couple of hours uh, to a couple of days, maybe maximum, for prototyping that story. And if you're taking longer, you're extending that time between how you thought about the design and getting the actual evaluation from users. So the more time passes by, you resist the need to test because you are afraid that it might get shot down. So these are the three basic uh, aspects I use as my recipe for prototyping, and I'm just sharing it with you, um, hoping that this will help you too. First of all, I always plan for user flows and not screens. So what that means is for the usability test. So for example, this dashboarding application I was talking about, the task which we give the user is it's very specific. It says create a bar chart showing all the movies released in the Netflix database, uh, which were released before 1987. Right. So it's a kind of a very broad task, and our only goal was to understand that the users understood that what the expectation was. We even gave them a little index card which showed what the final chart would look like. And we did that because we actually didn't care about that final representation as much as the steps the user would take to get to that goal. So that's the user flow and that's the user task we are going to prototype for. So in this case, I'm just showing an example of what that user flow might look like. And this is an example of an ATM withdrawal transaction. And as part of the withdraw transaction, the user would have to do certain things. And the prototype only contains those things. For example, enter your PIN, make a selection, choose which account you're going to withdraw the cash from, how much amount you're going to withdraw stuff from. And all the stuff which the user would actually participate in or actually walk through, they're reasonably fleshed out. And they're fleshed out in the sense that there is enough content fidelity to make a decision. It's not Laurel Lipson. Because if I want somebody to say, how would you kind of withdraw some money from this ATM? They need to be able to look at words and cues in terms of saying get cash. It needs to be there. It cannot be Laurel Lipson because then the user is not able to process that information. And the final thing in the recipe, I do tend to use some basic styles. And it's not like I'm not talking about branding per se, but enough style to differentiate one action from the other. For example, I might have a certain style for my primary action button, which might be slightly different from my secondary action button. My typography might have a visual hierarchy in it. And once I get these things in place, it becomes a lot easier. However, when I'm just going to use Indigo Studio as an example because I'm more familiar with it, is that in Indigo Studio, when you try to do an iOS based application, some of the default iOS styles are already in there, which means what does the edit button look like? What does the action button look like? What does the list style look like? Stuff is already decided for you in the toolbox. So it's kind of riffing off the same concept of having some kind of a basic styles in place so that you don't have to worry about it as you're prototyping. So that brings us to the first summary slide of types of prototyping tools. And the way I look at it is on the left column, these are the big buckets as I see it. First are image-based prototyping tools. What by image-based it means is you don't really draw the UI or the screen in the tool itself. You do this in a separate tool, for example, Photoshop or Illustrator. And what these image-based prototyping tools, and the example I'm going to show you here is a Marvel app. Um, Anybody can try that out because they allow, I think one project is free, so you can actually get a sense of how that tool works. And I'll show it to you briefly too. So on the other dimensions, I'm trying to differentiate them is, can you draw the UI? Can you add interactions, and how robust those interactions are? Because as you know that if you're on a device, you might actually need more device specific interactions like swipe or press and hold and things like that. So how robust that framework is. Then there's a concept of share, and I'm using share in a very broad sense. It means that from your desktop into somebody else's view, right? So, and that ideally would be great if it's a web-based view. That way, the user, you don't actually have to send anything to anyone other than a link. And most of these image-based tools actually do that very well. And they actually show a nice little device Chrome around that image, so it actually feels like that device. Then the next level is viewing it on the device. And sometimes that's very important because there's a big difference between viewing something on screen and then viewing it on the device, trying to use it with your fingers the way it's supposed to be. Because stuff like tap targets, the spacing between things, all of that becomes really important as that happens. And then the last one, it's something which you encounter when you are creating the prototype, and I call it manage. By manage, I mean that you have a lot of visual assets now created. You need a place for you to see all of them, to have a place to see, okay, how does this prototype work? How have I linked things together? That's what I meant by manage. And of course, as you grow older with the prototype, you need to replace files. You may need to create a duplicate of that stuff. So some kind of a project management kind of a structure. Then the next class are what I call wireframing tools. They were originally intended to provide a very reasonable UI library of components which you can drag and drop onto your design surface and create something which looks like a screen. And they're kind of device agnostic in the sense that they are just trying to give you a very sketchy way of doing it. And Balsamiq actually, I would say, kind of pioneered in this department because most people who have considered UI prototyping or wireframing have heard of Balsamiq. And there are a lot of tools out there which have kind of riffed off of where Balsamiq left off, or riffed off and provided an enhancement to what Balsamiq traditionally does. But they're still very popular. Since they are traditionally wireframing tools like Balsamiq, the interaction framework is not as robust, and it translates into the share part also, or the share dimension, is that they're not that specific about gestures and the kinds of interactions you might do. They definitely have things like click, which could similar to tap, and when you share, you can actually preview the prototype offline because it's a file-based system. You can also share it on My Balsamiq and actually view and edit that screens online. But the sharing story is more in terms of when you actually send it to someone, you can send it as an interactive linked PDF. Makes it very handy. It's an offline version, and as you click things on the design, it will kind of jump to a different page in the PDF. And that's kind of exactly how the tool works also, is for every UI or a result of an interaction, you have a new screen and you have created a link between two screens. You actually can do that in PowerPoint also, but that's a different story. And then you have this concept of viewing it on the device. Most of these kind of tools don't really go that far. It's meant to be previewed on a desktop, and that's why we have the question answer panel. Is if you know different, please mention it so that I can share it with the rest of the audience. And then there is manage. Of course, all of them have a management UI, a management capability, so you can actually view all the screens in your project, be able to rename them and things like that. And then there's the third class. I know it looks all green and looks biased, but I did not intend to for this just for Indigo Studio. This actually applies to other tools like Just in Mind, Axure, uh, Proto.io, UXPin. There are a lot of tools which I feel they try to be more in the prototyping tools mindset, where you draw the UIs using the same concept like a wireframing tool with UI element libraries available in the tool. The interaction framework is also pretty robust, as in you have more number of trigger events, for example, tap, click, hold, all that kind of stuff. Sharing story is also pretty robust, where you can most of the time you can share it in the cloud and send a URL to someone, and when the users click on the URL, they'll be taken to a browser page, and then they can preview the prototype. They also support viewing it on the device. Some of them have a built-in app which you kind of download from the App Store first, and then you'll be able to kind of navigate to the prototype and actually try it out on the device. And then manage, of course, these prototyping tools are kind of not a superset per se, but they definitely value the need to manage your design assets together. And finally, you have this new class of tools, which is I would call image plus code. And Framer.js comes to mind for that. You really don't draw the UIs. You still need image assets. So it's in a way image based. You create those image assets outside the tool and then you bring them in. Interactions are pretty robust. Their interaction trigger library is pretty strong. Sharing, again, no problem. It works the same way. It's in the cloud. You're able to view that stuff on the device. No problem. Management is not the strong suit. It's primarily because most of the examples, at least what I have seen for things like Framer.js, and I won't be discussing that for this presentation. Most of the things I've seen for Framer.js, if you go to Framer.js, and I think they're called demos, most of the stuff are between two UI states, and they're trying to talk about novel interactions or novel micro interactions, and that's where it kind of falls. Is that you have two states, and they're trying to show a very rich way of transitioning between those two things, and that's the fine level control offered by these image plus code tools like Framer.js. So just to summarize, uh, the image-based tools you create based on the user flow I have. So in this case, the example I was using was creating a dashboard study where users would create a chart where they would be able to see all the movies released in the Netflix database since 1987. For that, you would create all the steps you would read for the user flow, and then you would kind of add it to the tool and create links between them. So let me just do that first. So here I have, so before I do that, let me just show you the prototype I have in question, right? So I'm just going to sign in here, and I'm launching the prototype I have shared. So here I have the story I was talking about. Is the users are going to see this particular first UI. They will say, okay, I'm going to create a new dashboard. And whether they clicked on that or not is part of the usability study, right? So that's what you're trying to find out. They ask me to pick a dashboard layout. And trust me, the users would ask me always, why do I have to pick it right now? Can't I pick it later? But here, for the sake of the study, pick a dashboard layout. And once you do a dashboard layout, it shows data sources on the left. And then on the right, there's an invitation to say, hey, drill down to a table view. And then you can drag and drop. So, okay, I said Netflix. And you can see that, as I mentioned before, we want enough content so that the users can take action. And what we did is that we are anyway prototyping. So I think it's up to us to understand what kind of content is available and what kind of content can be shown. So in this, for this example, we actually looked at the fields and the entity sets available in the Netflix OData source. And then we try to mimic that exactly so that we are true to the content. And with this actually, when we are evaluating usability, you'll be surprised at the number of things which can throw the test off. And this is like realistic data coming from that OData source that people, okay, there is title, which title to choose, right? And these are all great aspects of feedback because we at least can understand there is a usability problem And we can ask ourselves, do we solve it in the application or is it something outside the application, right? So it's a decision point for us. So in this case, the expectation is the user will click on title, drag it in, and then immediately they'll see the data available in the title field. All the fields available, all the column headers are shown on the left also. And in order to actually plot the chart, I'm just going to do this pretty quickly. You drag release year into the measures. You hit release year into the columns. And trust me, users may or may not know how to do this at all, right? The fact that they have to pick release year and add it to the measures, pick release year again and add it to the columns, they may not know that. And this is all great feedback for us because we're just trying to understand, have we provided enough support to the user to accomplish this task, right? So in this case, they'll have the expectation is that they will click on rule and say, instead of top 10 items, they would say above value and set a value, apply, and it filters that stuff. And then they would go into visualize, we hope, and pick the column chart. And then it creates a column chart, right? So this task is more involved. I mean, there are more steps. For example, I can say, I'll preview this chart, collapse out of it. I'll then go back and I want to filter it again by average rating. I'll do the same thing. We hope the users will click on average rating, apply a rule, same thing, above value, apply, and then it changes the chart, and then I can hit done, right? So this is the very basic flow. It happened really quickly, but now let me show you how image-based tools will need to deal with it, right? So I have this Marvel open, and assuming that I have taken the time to create all the images I would need to support this particular user story. And Photoshop, people who are very proficient with Photoshop, they have good techniques to manage these kind of dynamic over static, right? So they might actually put the dynamic changes, for example, a modal window showing up, they might actually put it in a different layer so that they can preserve the background and then just put this stuff on top. And then when time comes to export, they can kind of show and hide certain layers and just kick out an image, right? And with Marvel, you can actually link it to a Dropbox account. So as the things are getting added into the Dropbox account, it automatically is also available to you inside this web application. But after you add these images by either dragging and dropping or by linking your Dropbox image account, you basically end up seeing this. And you'll be surprised. For the prototype I just showed you, I would say there are roughly around 33 screens. And that's how Marvel and also the wireframing tools deal with it, is even though they are small changes. So for example, now I have to find the image because I created all these images without having to think about interactions. It was just in my mind as a designer. And now I created all these images and I've exported it. Now I want to actually create the prototype using the tool. So for that, I'm going to start hunting for the new, it's this one, new dashboard start, right? So in Marvel, I would say, okay, let's edit that. And I've already done that here. So let me just remove that just for the sake of our exercise. So now I'm the edit mode for this particular screen. And Marvel has some cool tricks to basically say, hey, this is a fixed portion of the UI and never scroll or don't move that as content scrolls. But I don't need that right now. So I would say, okay, I already have the image. So where does the user go next? And they want you to just drag. And this creates a hotspot. And then it says, okay, find where it should go. So since I exported that carefully, in the sense that I have a good naming convention in my images. So everything with the new dashboard flow is prefaced with the word new. And for adding measures, it's got similar naming. So I can just search for the word new, and then it actually pulls up. The search happens dynamically here, and I say, okay, what's the next view? I say, okay, this one. So now what Marvel has done, it has said, okay, there's a link created between these two things. And I can assign a transition or change the interaction, which would trigger that stuff. So in this case, it's just a click, which is the default. And you can basically do other operations based on, because I already picked that it's an iPad kind of an application. So now that I have made that connection, I can now go to that particular screen by just shift clicking on this hotspot. And now I'm seeing this second screen. And from here, I would say, okay, somebody's going to drag and drop Netflix data. So I'm just going to do that. I'm just going to draw a hotspot here. And I'm going to find this screen, because once you drag and drop, I want it to be in Netflix data. That means that this gray overlay is gone, that one. Again, it gives me the invite to say shift click or command click. No, shift click. Shift click. And now I'm saying, okay, you're going to drag titles onto one of these in this area here. It doesn't matter where. Uh, they really don't have this concept of actually trying to show an animation of dragging and dropping, and neither does Indigo Studio. So I do that, and I say, okay, when you drag and drop, it should basically go here, and then again, command click, shift click, and then I'm here. I say, okay, release here should be dragged and dropped onto. I'd say, I think I named everything add measure. So right here. All right. So I'm doing this linking process retroactively. That means I first create all the images with the explicit understanding that I would need all these UI states. And then after I upload all these images to Marvel, I would then go back and select those things and then start doing this linking operation. So you have a host of uh, individual screens or images. Images are the same as screens, and you would kind of create those links, right? So in order to get a sense of how this is working out, I can just hit done, and I would go to my new screen again, and I want to just kind of get a sense of how this thing works. Um, Unfortunately, they don't have a search. I can just do Command F, I think. New. All right, right here. So now I can just walk through my prototype, or I hit preview, and that opens up. Oh, I think something happened and I didn't pick the iPad, but it's basically working the same way. If I picked iPad as the right Chrome, it'll show it correctly. It's not Marvel's fault. It's something which I did. Uh, but it's basically letting you jump through that. You see, if I have misclicked somewhere, it shows where the interaction is. I can click there. Then I click somewhere else. And again, it's kind of letting me know where I need to click to get to the next stage. Right? So that's how Marvel is kind of working out. But when I go back to, so the share story is also very similar, is that there's a simple way in which it's hosted. So you can actually send a URL to someone and they can actually view this prototype right in the browser. So that makes it really convenient. And I'm sure they have other tools to, this is the home screen. This will just let you flip through all the images you have in here. But this one doesn't have uh, any connection with the fact that it's an actual interaction. It's just letting you view those screens, right? So that's on the dashboard. However, this is where the managed stuff comes in. As a person, first time I come back in after I have created certain links, um, I personally couldn't find a way to look at them in sequence based on the user task, right? So they're still arranged alphabetically, and I couldn't tell which one is first unless I have a very robust naming convention even before I exported it, right? So that's the Marvel approach, where the images are done outside and then you add interactions retroactively. So going back to our presentation, so as I was saying, you create all the states you would need for those images, and then you would link them together. Wireframing tools, they work pretty much exactly the same way. The only exception is that you can draw the UI in the application itself. And I said I wanted to use Balsamiq, but I forgot to transfer my license. Uh, but I can try to show you what Balsamic's UI looks like if you're not familiar. And then for every screen or every image, just like you saw in the Marvel app, I will have to create a separate screen. And let's see if I can pull up um, Balsamic quickly here. So in this case, I was just trying to show you what the UI kind of looks like for Balsamic, is that you have a very robust UI library of components which you can simply drag and drop. In this case, I have dragged and dropped an iPad Chrome, and that's the way they prefer to do it, is that once you're done with it, you can export the stuff as a PDF, which is with interactive links in it. As you create new mockups, you can always create a new mockup. So this is the new dashboard mockup. So let me show you. So in this case, I just have one screen. I will have to kind of create multiple screens, each representing the state, right? So in this case, I would say, hey, I need a button, just drag and drop, and I can edit the button directly and say edit and so on and so forth. Since, as you can see, my license is not transferred, I'm just going to switch over to Indigo Studio and try to replicate the basic operations once again, right? So I'm going to Indigo Studio. So in Indigo Studio, this is a wireframe approach for doing prototyping, right? So what that means is I have created this first screen, then I would create a new screen. So for example, I have this open. So once I finished laying out the UI for that particular first screen, what the user would see, and obviously Balsamic or any of the other tools will not have an identical toolbox, but they will most definitely have a library of components which you can drag and drop. What I mean is you can just drag and drop a button onto the UI and literally draw the UI. And that's the point of distinction I'm trying to make between wireframing tools and image-based prototyping tools. You can actually draw the UI. Once you're finished with the screen, what you would traditionally do, you'll say, okay, I need a new screen. And in the new screen, you would create a different state and so on and so forth. At the end of it all, instead of seeing images as a tile of images, you would actually see a tile of screens, which are pretty much the same thing. For the usability test I was showing you earlier, I would have 33 screens, right? And then I need to figure out how they are kind of linked. For that, what I would do is I'll go to that first screen and say, okay, add a hotspot, or just select that UI element and say, I would say, let's remove this interaction for now. Let's say add interaction, navigate to a different screen. And in this case, I'll go and pick a different screen, or in Balsamic's case, you would see a name of that particular screen. So you better name it right. You would basically say, okay, this one, it should go here. So you select that and the link is made. And then if you have any transitions, which is not part of most wireframing tools because they tend to remain in the static medium, right? Once you've finished with all that, you can export it into a PDF or you can preview that prototype right there. But it's still a stitching operation, right? And what it fails at, in my mind, what it fails at trying to do better is the ability to get a sense of how much have you accomplished in the prototype. So I have 33 screens which were initially independent. I started creating links between them, but I don't know whether I've missed out on anything. Maybe only when I actually start interacting with the prototype. And that's the fascinating part, is that although it took you so long to create these 33 screens, when users click on it, they go click, 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 and it's really fast. And those things happen so quickly that it doesn't feel as tedious as originally thinking it's 33 screens. However, having those 33 screens also gives you a sense of how many steps are actually involved in completing a particular task. And that could be an early indicator of the potential complexity. At the same time, some of the interactions are not big screen transitions. They are like small things. You're clicking on a button and a menu shows up. Now, whether you want to treat it as a major thing or a minor thing, it's up to you. But for the user, in the context of the task they're trying to do, they're not actually worried about it as much as trying to figure out what's the next thing to do. The only difference between the traditional wireframing tools and prototyping tools like Sure or Indigo Studio is they really have whatever is provided by the wireframing tools, which is a UI element library to drag and drop to design your screen. On top of that, they have this concept of states. And some tools treat it slightly differently than other tools. For example, Axure's concept of state is represented in dynamic panels. So if you're familiar with dynamic panels, it's like it's a small zone inside your major screen, which could have different states. And based on the interaction, you could tell it to show that state of that panel, right? So in my example, let's see if I can pull back my example. So in this case, there's a base screen, and on top of the base screen, let's see if I can change this 1 second. Yeah, it's iPad. Okay, let's see if this works. Yeah, it works. So I have a base screen, and all the small changes on top could be a dynamic panel which is initially hidden, and then as the user is interacting with it, so this adding measures. It's too painful to look at there. So I'm just going to launch the prototype once again. Titles, release here. So this particular popover you're seeing right now, it could be a dynamic panel where it's a state where initially it is not shown. And when you click on something, it's shown. And then when you click on something else like a rule, the second thing is a second state of the same dynamic panel, right? So that state-based nature is what kind of makes some of the code-free prototyping tools like Axure, UXPaint, Indigo Studio different than the pure wireframing tools, right? So what that means is uh, instead of actually showing everything as separate, independent screens, they are kind of sets of UI states linked together. And Indigo Studio, that's kind of what makes it different, is that it can actually encapsulate those kind of screens together, and you can divide up your flow in different ways. So what that means is if I pull up Indigo Studio again for this very same project. So in the project home, the way I have done it is I have divided up my usability test into 4 key phases. And in the context of the task, the naming would kind of match up. The first is a new dashboard flow. Then there is this piece of adding measures. Then there's a piece of choosing a visualization. And then there's a dashboard finished. So they're kind of 4 key critical points. And the way I divided it up is because if somebody fails in that phase, at least we know where the problem is localized. But these are not just 4 screens. They are screens with screen states. What that means is that inside it, there is a flow, right? It's a different states of that particular screen or that particular flow. You don't have to do it this way. It's just the way I did it. Is I'm trying to. It's kind of part of a management come ease of use kind of thing. Is I'm trying to put them all together. And how this kind of works is the links you're seeing between these UI states. These are all interactions. So when I hover over it, it tells me what the interaction is. In this case, it's a tap interaction. These links are made automatically, and Indigo Studio does it slightly different from all the other tools out there. Is that it you're designing changes on top of a previous state more than creating a completely new screen. So what that means is, if I had to show a very crude example, I would say, hey, this is a new screen, and the first thing the user would see is a button. So I can just alt drag, search for button, and then I say, I can just name this click me. So that's the first thing user sees. Now related to this, I want to say when the user clicks on click me, add interaction, change the screen to a new state. And that's how the UI states are exposed in Indigo Studio. What does the user see different? I would say, oh, the user would see a modal of some kind. So I would just do that. I'll just alt drag here and look for a popover, which is what iOS uses. Let's move it down here. And inside the popover, I'm going to put a smiley just to say it's successful. I'm just looking for an icon, hitting enter, and just picking. And although I am creating a new screen state, it's built on top of the previous one. So when I look at this mini explorer, you see the link is already made, and the prototype is already up. The wireframe, the sketch is already a prototype. So if I hit run, the modal is showing. Now, if I want the modal to go away when I click me again, I can just do that. I can say hide me, and I can edit this interaction to say options, reverse it. And this is, I'm showing a very simple example, is that if I want to add animations or transitions, I would just drag this duration out. So the modal will now fade in. So it's not a separate thing. It's just adding duration to the UI change. If I go back to my report plus prototype, or the dashboard prototype I was showing you, it's working the same way. So if I open this dashboard, this is what the user would see at first, right? And when the user, I can enable highlights. When the user taps the stuff, they would actually see this. And what actually happened is you are designing changes from a previous state. Certain things were removed and some things were added. So it's a change on top of the previous. The benefit which that gives you is your screen is already an interactive screen as you're designing UI states. You don't actually have to think about interactions separately. It's part of the same user flow. So as the user is using it, you design it in the same flow. And that's, we believe, sets Indigo Studio completely different from all the tools out there. So if I now open the Interactions Explorer, you see the same flow happening, right? And what has happened here is from here, there's an interaction added on click, create a new state, and in that state I made these changes. From here I say add another interaction, create a new state. In this new state I again made some changes, and I could be putting things on top of the previous one. It doesn't really matter. What does matter is that there is an inheritance such that every previous state is a master for the other one. So you really don't have to explicitly think about screen masters. What that means is I can go back here and pick this header and give it a background color, for example. Like, it's not the defining characteristic here, but I'd say, okay, I want it to be white. And now when I look at my Interactions Explorer again, if any element is shared, they would automatically inherit the changes. If I don't use the same element, so in this case, let me just remove it. So in this case, I had made a change such that the original container was removed. But if I had kept the same container, they would actually have a link between each other. So I can come here, go back to the previous state and say, hey, I want you to be a different color. And if I go back to my this state, you see the change was already cascaded further down below. So this way, you can actually have a very crude prototype, and then you can add data or content later, and the prototype will automatically update itself. And once you're done with this thing, the way you actually share it is the same way, like I talked about before. You say share, and once you share, it asks you to share. Like I'm sharing it on indigodesign.com, and once I finish the generate link, the URL will connect me back to this particular page. This is the URL I would see. So the users, when they actually get the link, they click on it, they're going to see this particular UI. If I have some descriptions about this prototype, it will show up right below here. To launch it, I can just click this to launch. Now the testing on the devices aspect, this is running on HTML, JavaScript. So if you have an iPad and you access this prototype using the iPad, you would actually be able to interact with the prototype just like you would on the desktop browser. The only difference is that we don't show you a fancy iPad Chrome like we are showing here, right? Because it's redundant, so we don't have to show that. The other benefit of using the UI elements inside whatever prototyping tool is that they tend to be more vector in nature, such that doesn't matter what the resolution of the device is, the things are always pixel perfect. With the image-based tools, the problem you will run into is that you have to create really big images. However, you need to have something like Photoshop or some tool to create those images. PowerPoint really won't work for you. Um, you can create those high resolution images and share it on these image based prototyping tools. And one thing that, to give credit where credit is due, is that those tools know that they're getting these big images coming in, and they have done everything they can to make it as optimal as possible, such that there is no lag in terms of interacting with the prototype. They kind of process those images or do some magic, and they are able to kind of uh, reduce the footprint and still make the prototype pretty lively. Once you share it on Indigo Design, the only difference is that you can actually come in, you can enable the hotspots to see where the prototype needs to be clicked. You can pretty much come in and add, like I can enable comments on this thing, and now I can say, hey, um, why do we need uh, a dashboard layout picker, right? So I'm able to kind of add a comment on this, and it's unique to that particular state. If there's anybody else who's viewing this prototype, they would actually see these comments in the sidebar, and you can have a quick design critique about this design. But this is the design critique phase, may be an early phase for your prototypes, but the real use of the prototype is to actually do usability testing. So going back to my presentation, we're almost wrapping up. So you have the user flow, and the way prototyping tools, the more purpose-built prototyping tools, the way they handle it is creating states. So that way you are actually doing minor changes all the time. Oh, the one thing I forgot to show you is, oops, Alt Tab, is just like, I kept complaining about the fact that I don't get a sense of how my different screens are kind of linked together. So in Indigo Studio, when you go back to the project home, I can always go and see the connected view, and it would pretty much let me know how the screens are linked. From new dashboard, the next screen is adding measure, the next screen is visualization, the next screen is dashboard finished, and then inside that tool, inside that particular screen, I can see the flow inside that in terms of state. So I don't actually have to worry about screens out of context. I always know that they are in a certain sequence. And even when you export it into a PDF format, for some reason, imagine you need a PDF format document. Let me see if I can find that here. Plus. So you can see in the PDF format, every screen and the states are organized based on how the user would have used it. So technically, I could just fire up the PDF and walk through the same scenario by just going right left. So if I can say view full screen, a slideshow on my Mac, I can go right, the new screen, they see a dashboard picker, go right, local files, add the titles, come to this screen, add something else. So I can basically walk through the UI just from my PDF, because we take care of continuing to maintain that linkage concept we talked about, because that's what interactive prototypes have. You can have linear or non-linear flows, and we want to make sure that you're always looking at those images not as an alphabetical list, but in terms of a interaction flow, right? So going back to the presentation. So just to summarize, I said that there are at least 4 classes of so-called code-free prototyping tools. Some of them are image-based, where you draw the UI using some other application, but depending on how your prototype is for your usability test, you may have 5 or 50. Interactions are reasonably robust. You can still do a lot of swipe, click, and tap, those kind of trigger events. Sharing is also very robust. You can actually share with a web URL and people are able to use it. And some of them even have a native app in the App Store. You can download the app and access this via that application. Depends, because sometimes just to get review or feedback on something, we don't really want anybody to install anything on their own phone to get a feel for it. But if you really want to engage with that design, get a sense of all those cool animations, which sometimes web browsers may not render as well, it's a good solution. And then finally, we talked about seeing on the device, which is the same iOS app, the app concept. Management is not pretty. As I was showing you on the screen for Marvel app, is that I have all these screens, but I don't know how they're linked or what's the first screen I need to see, unless I have a really good naming convention. Wireframing tools, you draw the UI inside the tool. You can add some level of degree of interactions. Sharing is you can preview it locally or export it into a linked PDF. Device testing is not a strong suit for them. And management is also similar to Marvel App, where you have all your screens as independent units and they have links between them, but you really can't see them till you use it. Prototyping tools, you can draw the UI, interactions are robust, you can share on the web, you can view it on the device, and management is pretty robust. Indigo is just one step different, where the sitemaps or these kind of flow diagrams are actually created automatically based on interactions. You don't have to create them exclusively. And image plus code is things like framer.js, same thing. You don't create the assets in the app. You're actually creating them outside. Most of the time, the interactions are very robust. Sharing is very easy on the web. Device testing is also possible. Management is not a strong suit, but they never considered it because they are trying to create novel micro interactions or novel transitions between two things, like a spring effect, or as you're swiping, things are kind of animating into the screen. So you're kind of stuck between two states. If I want to talk about this two states concept in the context of the example I was showing you for adding a new dashboard, it's literally clicking add a new dashboard and then seeing the dashboard layout picker. Those are the two states, and you can do some fascinating things between that to make the experience a very fun one, right? But I personally feel that I still need to finish a usability prototype, right? I need to evaluate whether this is the right design, and then I can also refine it further. But there's a different. I would say focus on content, focus on the flow, and focus on some basic styles to let you conduct usability testing. That should be kind of the priority for prototyping in general. It's prototyping is equal parts evaluation as much it's design. It's not just about creating a prototype. Going back, and that's about it. I just want to reiterate the concept of flow. And if you're interested in Indigo Studio, you can always uh, follow us on Indigo Designed or download Indigo Studio from Indigo at infragistics.com. So let me look through the questions now. So I'll try to be here to follow it up. So I'm just going to read it as I see it. If you can, please cover Ignite, how Ignite UI leans more on .NET. How does it compare against Telerik and DevExpress? It's about Indigo Studio right now, so I can't really do justice to this question, so I need to skip it. If you are interested, you could definitely email the Ignite UI product team. You can email ambrose@infragistics.com, and I can send you this detail for you. Oops, somebody said the voice is gone. I'm so sorry. So I have a question which says, will Indigo allow full export of HTML, CSS, JavaScript to convert prototypes into real code? We are working on improving the quality of code assets. And the way we are looking at it is that not all developers need your designer code, because the way applications are built is in fascinatingly different ways. However, there is a lot of things we can identify as busy work for the developer, and it could be things like styles, it could be animation timings, it could be um, you know transitions. We would love to let the developer look at the prototype and extract bits and pieces they find useful, right? And that's the kind of approach we are pushing for first up, is the allow to allow good quality reusable code assets. And you should see uh, stuff related to that before the end of this year, where we are kind of working in parallel with a major release to work on that. So you can host the prototype for them to look through the web. Yes, I breezed through that rather quickly, but if you go to indigodesign.com, that's the kind of it is both a private and a community space for hosting prototypes. I can give you a quick peek at that. Um, that is taking priority. So this is indigodesign.com. If you can see a portion of my screen, so if I go to Indigo, so all the prototypes I have shared from Indigo Studio is visible to me here. And if for some reason I want to share it with the community so that I have some cool idea which I would like to share with everybody, you can actually select whatever prototype you have. So in this case, see this get bootstrap responsive example. I kind of shared it on my personal share, and then I selected that particular prototype and said, okay, for this prototype, set the privacy as community, and they can see it from there. The other benefit you get from sharing on Indigo Design is, of course, you can add comments, you can delete prototypes, change the prototype details, and so on and so forth. But I don't want to waste too much of your time going into the details of that. Can you export to a format that does not require hitting the indigodesign.com? Sure. Um, there are two solutions to that. One is that from the prototype itself, when you're sharing, instead of saying share on Indigo Design, you can share on your desktop. This one would create an offline version of your prototype. So it'll have an index.html page and all the assets which would power that particular prototype. And you can actually put it on Dropbox or some other file share you like, and basically people will be able to use it. The only difference for the offline version is that you do not get commenting and all the other stuff associated with design review, because you need a server for that. Our solution to that problem, especially for people in the enterprise, is that we allow you to install the entire Indigo designed infrastructure behind your firewall on premise. So that way you keep it on your device, on your servers, um, and get all the benefits of quickly sharing and getting a URL in return. It's not on our servers. That's the only difference. What technologies used to display the images, since they're not image based? They're HTML and CSS. Some of them are SVGs if you're referring to Indigo Studio prototypes. The icons are SVG, but rest of it are just HTML elements. And you can just inspect it in the prototype. Let's see. Do you need a paid account to make comments? Comments are part of the Indigo Studio license. If you have the latest version of Indigo Studio, commenting is free for you. Do you have source control integration? Not by default, but it will work with your source control solution. So if you have any other questions related to that, you can send us an email at indigo@infragistics.com. It's like a visual design document of a real world application. I think it's a continuation of something. If you were to cook down, how is Indigo Studio different from Axure? If you actually, the only difference, I think the key difference between Indigo Studio and Axure is that we don't deal with dynamic panels directly. Uh, we are advising people to approach the design with kind of three questions. What does the user see first? What would they do next? And as part of that operation, it's where you define the interactions and triggers. And then what would the user see? And that would create a new state or a new screen. And in doing that, we are having all the benefits of you getting your dynamic panels, where it's a state-based system, but you don't actually have to run the prototype every time to see those states. You actually see it in the IX flow. All the changes are superimposed over the previous one, so you actually always have context for those changes, as opposed to editing dynamic panels separately. Where dynamic panels and have similarity with Indigo Studio is if you use something called screen parts. Screen parts are like dynamic panels where you can have an encapsulated interactive widget and you can place it on any screen in your project. So you can edit it once and take it away. Can I get a copy of that as well? MVC Ignite stuff. Um, I think this is best, Brandon. This is best to email the Ignite UI team. I'll make sure that I email you that information. Is there any tool which gives us code can be reused by a developer? Um, I think the word code is so broad. The way I have kind of tried to refine it is code in terms of reusable assets, things which developers don't really need to do. But there are a lot of things developers need to do. And we're just trying to make that separation is let developers do what they're really good at. And we would try to take care of some of the busy work. With that said, tools which give great code, they tend to be a developer tool. Tools which are very visual uh, tend not to support that. Tools which are very visual and give really good quality code tend to not have the support for free-form prototyping, right? And we are trying to front load the risk involved in making the wrong design. And that's the real savings in an ideal world. But I've already commented about what kind of assets Indigo Studio would provide. How long will your old design links stay active now that you have a new domain? We are not interested in moving to a new version. So how long? We are redirecting your old stuff. So Indigo Studio still allows. So Indigo Design is just a name we gave to our old server. Um, so all your prototypes which you have shared previously are still there. The links are still being redirected. So your users would have no disruption of service. So nothing to worry there. Or what is the typical learning curve for this tool? How long is the training period? Um, it kind of depends on you. The key concept I tried to show you in Indigo Studio is creating states. As long as you figure out that you can drag a UI element onto the screen, add an interaction, and then make changes to the UI as opposed to drawing a new UI, with that basic concept, you can actually create a really long user flow, or you can create a really short user flow with animations or transitions. That to me is the key difference between Indigo Studio and all the other tools out there, is that we are trying to encourage designers to create prototypes in the same way users would use it, rather than having to create and pre-create all the assets and then come together and stitch them together. Because every time you try to do that, you would realize that you forgot to include something, right? Um, can you import HTML and CSS snippets to create elements or screens in Indigo Studio? Um, I think I understood this question more as, can you inject code blocks or other from outside applications into the prototype? So maybe you have some really cool widget you have created somewhere else and you would like to put it in like an iframe or something. It's something which we are considering. But if you have more details about this, please do get in touch with us at indigo@infragistics.com. And we would love to talk to you about this. For example, CodePen. Understood. Yeah. So that's what I figured you were asking. Is that you've created something fancy in CodePen and you would like to include that in the prototype. Yeah, that's something which we would definitely look into. But it's not something which is available right now. We started doing some of this stuff. Um, like for example Google Maps and YouTube videos, you can do that right now. Is that you can grab the video stencil onto the design surface and then just give it the YouTube URL, and then when you run the prototype it kind of hosts the YouTube prototype. All right, that's all the questions we had. Jess, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah. No, I think we're just about all set. So I want to thank everybody once again for joining us today. If there are any other questions or concerns or anything, you can email Indigo
At
at
infragistics.com.
infragistics.com. So feel free to send any questions or further comments over to George. He'll address that there. We'll also be following up. I saw that there were a few questions that were specific to other products
Correct.
by Infragistics. So we'll definitely be following up with you guys. We have your email addresses. And you guys will also be getting a follow-up email within the next week or so with the recording to this whole session with the Q&A and everything. So if you missed out on anything or if you're having any technical issues, I apologize for that. But don't worry, you guys will be having full access to the recording and everything, so you won't miss out. And that's about it for us today. So I want to thank you again for joining us, and hope you have a great day, and we will see you at a future webinar. Thanks. Bye.
It'll